Thank you again for inviting me this morning. I think one of the privileges that I have as a doctor is that, and in the kind of roles that I do these days, is that actually I kind of span the kind of spectrum from being a patient. And I've had significant, those of you that know me know I've had significant healthcare issues about 9 or 10 years ago, and that profoundly changed the way I thought about how we practice and care, to I should on Friday mornings. I normally am seeing patients, so I still do that, and then I kind of work in NHS England and have an overview of particularly the system in South London, but also across London, about what goes on in hospitals, what goes on in general practice. So I feel like I have this privilege of looking across and seeing all sorts of amazing stuff, but sometimes some really horrible stuff. Now, I think we've already heard a really good summary about compassion, and what I wanted to talk to you just for a few minutes is again tell you some stories that have come out of my professional life, my personal life, and my family life. One of the things that I think we have to keep reminding ourselves is when we come into contact with people who need our care and compassion, they're at best anxious, at worst they're absolutely terrified and fearful. And certainly when I was needing health care, particularly about 9 years ago, I was terrified most of the time, and I was very, very well informed. And we're in our normal workplaces, patients are in this strange and bizarre place where they're having to do all sorts of things. I had an impatient experience. I'm actually quite introvert. I process pain and suffering on my own. Being told difficult news when I'm sharing a room with another person who I don't really know is terrifying and awful, and it's unsafe. So I think remembering that that we, that we're often in places of power just because it's our normal workplace, let alone all the knowledge and expertise that we have. I too looked up the definitions, and that thing about being with people that are suffering, people that are vulnerable, people that are wounded, and again remembering that we all will be or have been in that position. And I think if we can keep that sense of our own humanness, it's really, really, really important. One of the other things that became incredibly powerful for me when I was a patient actually was I want to be treated as Jane. I don't want to be treated as I had cancer and then I broke my leg. I didn't want to have these labels. I wanted people to talk about my needs. So I just want to tell you a story about when I had radiotherapy. I was determined I was going to go on working, so I thought I'd been really clever, and I organised to have my treatment every evening. I didn't work terribly far away from where I was having my treatments. I thought, that's great, I'll go to work, I'll go and have the treatment, then I'll go home. And actually that was fine. And then halfway through, the team said to me, "Oh, Jane, we would like you to see a doctor at least halfway through." I said, that's fine. When would you like me to come? "Oh, we don't book appointments for patients to have radiotherapy. They have to kind of come when they're there." I said, "Well, I'm here in the evenings, so you've got doctors here." "Oh, no." "Well, could you come tomorrow?" I said, "Well, actually, I'm interviewing 5 people tomorrow because that's what's my diary. I can't change it." So every day we'd sort of have this conversation, give me a time to come that fits with my diary. And of course they couldn't do it because the system was wrong. They didn't think that people having radiotherapy should have appointments. That was just the way it was set up. And I got furious about it, so I got more entrenched in my position. I wasn't going to... And of course I got to the end of the treatment and somebody was obviously ticking the boxes and said, "But you've not seen a doctor." And I said, "Well, we're at the end now." So they found a very, very junior member of staff who, rather terrified of me, I think, came to see me right at the end of the time. I contributed nothing to my care whatsoever, and they ticked the box, and that was that. And so for me, that felt unbelievably uncompassionate. I wanted to be treated as a professional who was getting on with their lives, needed to have treatment. And that very much has been one of the things that, as I think about care pathways, healthcare systems. How do we design things in a way that takes account of who people are, rather than it just fitting because that's the way we do things? Another thing that struck me particularly powerfully when I was an inpatient, before I had surgery, I needed to go and have a procedure done in the X-ray department, and they brought me a wheelchair. I was like, excuse me, I'll walk downstairs. Oh, well, what if you faint? I said, well, I think the X-ray department will be able to call for a wheelchair if that's what I need. I said, anyway, it'll prevent the DVT that I might get when I have surgery later on. I was a challenging patient. But again, I think we don't think about what the person in front of us always needs or wants. I have a friend who's highly extrovert, and the best environment for her, if she's really poorly, would be to be in an old-fashioned Nightingale ward, because she loves having loads of people around her. For me, that is the worst thing you could possibly do to me. So there's something for me about trying to, in the short periods of time that we have, to get to know what makes people tick. What are their fears, aspirations, hopes? How do they want to be treated as we go forward? I think another very powerful experience in my life was quite a long time ago now, probably about 15 or 16 years ago, and I was the chair of a PCG back in the days when we had PCG. And one of the things that was fun about that was that we were able to recruit our team from scratch. So I sat in a room for about 3 days with a group of people interviewing just endlessly. And we got some great people at the end of that. But one of the things that made me want to cry was that a number of people that we interviewed during that process told us stories about how badly the NHS had treated them as employers. And actually there were times when we as a panel were almost moved to tears by some of the stories. And part of the issue for us as Compassion, and we've already talked about it, is how we treat our staff. If your staff are feeling rubbish, how can you get the energy to care for others? And so I think for me, one of the challenges, whether you're a doctor, a nurse, a therapist, or actually a receptionist in a clinic, if we treat people in a rubbish way, of course they're going to not be able to have compassion. My final story around the practice where I work, it is a happy team. And I was very struck a few months ago when an elderly gentleman in the middle of winter who has really quite severe dementia sort of wandered in the middle of the morning. The reception staff didn't speak to the nurses or the doctors in the practice. They said, "Oh, right, it's Mr. K. We know he's got dementia. What's he doing here? He hardly got any clothes on." They brought him in, they sat him in the coffee room, they gave him a hot drink, they tried to contact his wife and his daughter who weren't to be found and weren't to be available. So somebody sat with him, talked with him, thought he was a bit hungry, so found some food. And actually the reception staff, without talking to any of the clinicians, made that man comfortable, attended to his needs in a really compassionate way. And they did it with humour and good sense. And so for me, there's something about it. It's not just us as clinicians, but it's actually making sure that our whole teams have permission, if you like, to do that caring. My mum and sister have used one of the trusts in South London quite a bit over the last years, and every time they tell me about their experiences, the thing they always remark on is how the porters made them tea, or a nurse had said, "You've been here ages, why don't you just go and get a sandwich?" And so that attention to those human caring needs are the things that people remark on. So thank you very much.